Welcome to this special from Windows on the World with a very special guest, Jerry Marzinsky, a retired psychiatric practitioner of over 35 years experience in dealing with psychotic patients, people who are suffering from paranoid schizophrenia. We've done many shows on this phenomena and they are all available in an article at windowsontheworld.net. I think it's in the latest shows page. We've summed up all the work we've done so far on this subject, and the article is called Demons Are Real, and it will be posted underneath this video when this actually goes to its destination. It will also be available on Odyssey, and our shows are live every Sunday at 9:30 p.m. on Spreaker. All that information is on the homepage of windowsontheworld.net, and you can also join us in our own Discord group. So let's get on with this special for tonight. In our previous shows, we've talked about the voices that are heard. Negative entities are behind this phenomenon and not random hallucinations, as Jerry found out over his very varied experience with patients who were suffering from paranoid schizophrenia, who had been imprisoned and were also being held in large psychiatric institutions. Now, we've gone into a lot of depth with this subject, and we're going into a much more fascinating area for anyone who's seen the previous shows. And if you haven't seen the previous shows, please do, and look up Jerry's work at jerrymarzinsky.com. Today, we're going to be talking about the characteristics of these voices, how they actually operate, because these things seem to work to a template, to a pattern, which is astonishing for most people who think that people are hearing random hallucinations and suffering from a hallucinatory experience. But these voices are cognitive and they are consistently negative, and they have a interrelationship with the person who they've invaded. And this all goes into the history of demonology, and it's a massive subject that does go back as long as mankind has walked the earth. So we're talking about something very deep here, but we're going to be talking about the characteristics and real case studies today from Jerry over 35 years, and what his patients have actually said to him when he was trying to help them get rid of these voices. We've actually covered how to get rid of them through the That's a Lie program, which Jerry Marzinsky and Sherry Swiney put together. And it's also in Jerry's book, which is available on jerrymarzinsky.com. So without too much more exposition, we're going to get straight into it, and I'm going to bring in Jerry. Hi, Jerry. I've just done a brief introduction about our other shows and your work and what we're going to be talking about. Basically, the characteristics of the voices. In the previous show, we talked about the patterns that these voices seem to run. They seem to work to a template almost. So we're going to go into that tonight. First of all, give us a brief introduction for people who may not have seen you before, although most of our viewers have.
Well, yeah, I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm a clinical psychotherapist. I've worked in the mental health system in the United States my entire life. I've worked in every facet of it: mental health centers, emergency room, state prisons with the criminally insane, private and public psychiatric hospitals. So I've been through all of them. You know, every single type of mental health treatment that they've had out here, I've worked in those situations. And I'm going to tell you what I've seen from my perspective, because they're not going to let you into these places. You can't walk into a psychiatric hospital and say, listen, I want to study schizophrenics. They won't let you in. Same thing with the prison. You know, I've never, ever seen a researcher in any of the frontline places I've worked, ever. Not once. You know, they just don't go there. They won't allow them in. So what the big pharma and the psychiatric mafia have done is they've taken over the medical and psychological education system. And they did this back in 1910 with the Carnegie Foundation, where Rockefeller and a group sponsored the infamous Flexner Report, which shut down medical schools that didn't teach pharmacology. So they're basically saying, you teach pharmacological medicine, or you can't issue licenses. Right? So at that point, they took over the mental health system, and Big Pharma ran it from there. And psychologists or psychiatrists are their pill pushers. So they didn't care about finding a cure. They wanted to push pills. Well, we
can see the result of that now, can't we, with the global health security system and the UK Public Health England, which sounds like it was actually about public health, is now the UK Health Security Agency, which delineates people as a biohazard. So in a way, this was a precursor to all that. It's basically the same thing. So what we're experiencing now is a follow-on from that. So today we're going to get into the sort of characteristics and these case studies that you did of how people manage to identify and overcome these voices. And sometimes there's multiple voices that people were suffering from. So we're going to get into that today. So maybe we should get onto that aspect now and some of these case studies that you actually brought forward, which I found incredibly fascinating. And we've also got some examples of a person who was convicted of a very brutal murder and the poems that he wrote running up to that murder, which I've read. We get into those a little bit later on. But first of all, these case studies are absolutely fascinating, Jerry. So maybe we should start with them.
Should I go through real quickly the pattern or not? Just
yes.
Okay.
Yes, I think we should. Yes.
So these patterns were derived from hundreds of interviews with schizophrenics. Actually sitting down and speaking to them and asking them, what are these voices saying? What are they doing? How are they acting? How are they behaving? Now, the psychiatric mafia insists that these things are hallucinations. But if they run well-founded, unswerving patterns, they can't be hallucinations. Something is controlling them. Right? And the first one that came out was negativity. They're consistently negative, derogatory, insulting, abusive, and destructive. What holds them on that path? So, I don't know. I've been in trouble with psychiatry for asking patients about what their voices are saying, what they're doing, how they behave, and been pulled up before medical directors twice and told, these are hallucinations. You're making them worse by asking the patients about them. You're reinforcing their reality. So what they've done is they've shut out any investigation by controlling the medical schools and teaching that these things are hallucinations and that they're not worth studying. So when I got to the state hospital, here's all these patients hearing voices, and I would ask staff, what are these things? They're hallucinations. Everybody believed they were hallucinations. Nobody was curious about them. They all believed they were hallucinations, and the only way to treat them was with drugs. And that's what they did. They dished out dump trucks full of drugs, which cured nothing. It cured absolutely nothing. What it did is it reduced the intensity of the voices, but it didn't get rid of them. So our drug-fueled mental health system is nothing but a friggin' merry-go-round. They bring them into the hospital, they drug them senseless, they release them, they can't stand the side effects of the drugs, they go off and they come back again, and each time the mental health merry-go-round fleeces the taxpayer and the government of thousands of dollars, and it just goes round and round and round with them curing nothing. In the meantime, these drugs are rotting out they shrink the person's brain and rot out their peripheral nervous system with long-term use. So these are some of the most dangerous drugs that are used in the medical system today. So to go back to these interviews with these patterns. Now, anybody who works with schizophrenics can see these patterns for themselves. All they got to do is talk to the patient and ask. They're right there. They're right in front of their faces. All they got to do is look at them, but they won't even do that. They're more concerned with pushing their drugs. And between psychology or psychiatry and big pharma, they're making $474 billion a year just selling antipsychotic drugs.
Well, I think we're in a similar situation now with the current pandemic narrative. It's the same thing. So, yeah, we've discussed this a lot over the years, and I found your insights into this extremely helpful and validating. And yeah, we're going to get into some of those studies tonight, which I found riveting, actually.
So the patterns now these come from hundreds of schizophrenics. It's not just one or two. They're all saying the same thing. Nobody's talking to them, but if they did, this is what they would be told. So the voices are consistently negative. The question you have to ask is, what holds a hallucination in a consistently negative pattern and doesn't allow it to go random like all other hallucinations. You know, it doesn't fit the pattern. Second thing is they're anti-religious. They don't like people going to church. They don't like them reading the Bible. They squirm at the 23rd Psalm. Patients have told me that they react to the 23rd Psalm like worms thrown on a hot frying pan. So why would a hallucination do that? Why would a hallucination react negatively to anything religious? You know, they foster and create negative emotion. So virtually every thought that they put into the person's head is designed to create a negative emotional reaction. So these things, they don't have an energy source of their own. They have to get it from us. You know, we're the cow.
Yes. So they're extra dimensional, but they manifest themselves in thoughts which invade people. And they obviously harvest these people's energy in some form or other. Otherwise, it wouldn't be happening. And obviously, this just creates havoc on Earth. And it's been talked about for thousands of years. Indeed, the stories of the Watchers, those who inbred with the daughters of men, were killed off. And this is the Book of Enoch, and their evil spirits were buried inside the earth. And there's a real long history of this stuff in every religion in the world and every belief system in the world. And of course, Jesus was alleged to have rid people of evil spirits.
23 times.
Yes, yes. So we're talking about a phenomenon that is not peculiar. It's something that's been around since man has walked the earth. So, yes, it would be really good now to go into some of these examples that we've been looking at.
So one thing that psychiatry and psychology and medical system don't understand is that these voices don't belong to the physical universe. They belong to an energetic universe.
Yeah.
There is no time there. There is no space there. There is no matter there. You know, so a schizophrenic can move from one country to another, and the voices show up right there. They play by different rules.
Well, I think that's really interesting, the way that thought forms work as well, because I did experience what you've just been talking about in a case that we both know about. And this thing that was attached to the person I was trying to help did indeed attack me from thousands of miles away. So I can back that up. But I suppose we're now going to be talking really about the experiences that these people have had and how they related them to you and how you tried to step in and the results that they got. It's absolutely fascinating because this is stuff that nobody's ever really talked about before.
So let me quickly finish up these patterns. You know, they foster and create negative emotion. They energetically drain their victims. So after the voices attack, the people are drained. It's sometimes so drained they can't get out of bed. They get louder after sunset, which is very odd. They get louder when ignored. So psychiatry said, take your medicine and ignore the voices. They won't be ignored. They get louder. They foster consistent self-destructive behavior. They foster isolation. They demand the attention of their victims. They maneuver for increasing control over their victims. They gaslight. They manipulate perception. They have complete access to the person's memory. They demand that the victim don't tell anybody else about them. They're consummate liars. They lie about everything. You can't trust anything they say. They consistently steer their victim away from anything that might generate joy. They manipulate feeling without speaking. They short-circuit reason. They pass themselves off as thoughts belonging to the victim. So yes. I've had a number of patients ask, who are you? What are you? And they would say, we are you. We are you.
Yes. Just before we carry on, Jerry, somebody's put into chat and asked a question whether your book would be suitable for somebody who's suffering schizophrenia but in a high security mental hospital.
Well, the voices aren't going to like them reading that book, but if they're in a high security place and they got nothing else to do, they might. But you know, what the voices do is any interference, they go nuts. They don't want any interference from their draining the energy from these victims. you can send it in there and see that if they read it, it'll help them understand what the voices are, and they have to understand what they are before they can do anything about them.
Yeah.
You know, they have to understand that they're not their thoughts. They don't belong to them. They come from another place. So yeah, it wouldn't hurt to, at the worst, they just won't read it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, that answers that.
So they destroy positive self-concept. They fill the victim's mind with negative thoughts about themselves and others. They attempt to pull the victim away from consensual reality. They use confusion as a means of instilling negative suggestions. They're averse to anything positive or beautiful. They attempt to inform the schizophrenic that the voices are any attempt to inform the schizophrenic that the voices are energetic parasites will trigger a volatile reaction from them. So they don't want people to know that. Okay. So what we're going to do today is take you into the mind of what psychiatry considers a criminally insane individual. And what I have here is while I was exploring this in the prison system, I took extensive notes from patients who were very interesting to me. So what I'm going to do is just read these, and then Mark's going to comment, and I've written comments all through these. So I'm going to bring you into the therapy session with one of the more interesting of the bunch.
Okay.
So this fellow had a long and extensive criminal history. I mean, he was in trouble with the law since he was 13. He'd been incarcerated in jails a number of times. He's served years in prison. He's been hearing the voices probably for 30 years before I ever met him. He completely recovered and went off his meds. It took a while to do that. But the first thing people need to understand is these voices are not hallucinations like the psychiatric mafia insists. The psychiatric mafia and big pharma have not done no research into the voices at all. They've just arrogantly got up on their footstools and proclaimed these are hallucinations because we say so. You know, the high priest of psychiatry. And then they teach that in medical schools. And then they teach that the only thing that can do anything about the voices are their toxic drugs. And they're brainwashing generations of students with this lie. You know, they say there is no other treatment. They don't know the cause, they don't know the cure, but they insist that medications are the only way to do this, and those medications cure absolutely nothing. So this fellow was on medications when I met him. He comes in from another prison unit with a diagnosis of psychosis. And when I called him in, he appeared to be thin and nervous. It was clear that he'd been beaten down. He looked haggard. He was thin. He was hesitant to speak. And I asked him if he was on psych meds. I knew he was because I had his chart. And he said he didn't, but I had his chart. I asked him, he said he admitted to it. I asked him, do you hear voices? And his response was a guarded no. But I knew better. You know, I could tell that he wasn't telling the truth, and because he got progressively more nervous. So this is one of the things that happen with schizophrenics. They don't like those meds. Those side effects are awful. They're awful. There's pages of them. And they create this lethargic, nervous jitteriness. It's like this schizophrenic feeling. You feel drugged down, but at the same time you're nervous. It's an awful feeling. So, you know, if one of these patients, say I was part of the psych staff, so they didn't trust me any more than they did anybody else. You know, so when you start asking them about the voices, they're afraid to tell psychiatrists about the voices, because what the psychiatrist will do is increase their medicines or change them. You know, and a lot of times they'll increase them. So they don't tell them what's going on with the voices. Everything's fine. You know, I don't need any more medicines. Everything's going on. And you know, psychiatry, it's like when all you got is a hammer, everything's a nail. So no matter what they say, they get doused down with some kind of drug. So I told this guy, I said, you know, I got your record here. It says you heard developed the voices at one point, and I asked him, when did they start? And he said they started at age 13. So by the time I met him, he heard the voices for 30 years or more. And 13 is what they teach is, young kids aren't affected by the voices. I've seen very young kids affected by these voices in the ER. 10, 12, 13. If they're abused, there's a good chance that they might be suffering voices. So I asked this fellow, I said, well, did the voices come on suddenly? And he said, pretty much so. So I asked him, well, how'd they start off? And it was obvious that nobody had asked him about this kind of stuff before. So even showing an interest in the voices, he started to drop his guard. Because what most psych staff do, you're hearing voices, I got to tell the psychiatrist you're going to be drugged, or they'll put it down in the record. They can feel when you are interested in what's going on with them, and psychiatry and psychology aren't asking those questions. A big part of their lives of schizophrenics are the voices, which the voices themselves tell them not to tell anybody about them. So it's hard to get them to speak about them because they got locked up for them, they got drugged for them, they got put in mental hospitals because they were hearing voices. So they don't want to talk to psych people or psychiatrists about that.
An interesting point, Jerry, which I read in one of these case studies, was that you were very careful in telling the people how to deal with these voices, because you are explaining to this fellow, well, don't fight them, because that's what got you into trouble. So if you violently oppose them in your own head, it's worse somehow, right?
It is,
because they will retaliate.
They'll retaliate, and then and then there's a battle. So it's best, if you don't know anything else to do about them, is just let them go through. But in the That's a Lie program, I would say 85 to 90%, maybe more, of what they say are lies. They don't care about the person at all. What they want to do is generate that negative emotional energy because they can't get it anywhere else. Yeah. And you won't see any schizophrenic animals. You don't see schizophrenic animals. You see them act weird because of rabies or some physical disease. But this is not a physical disease, no matter how hard psychiatry has tried to make it one. Because,
well, also with animals, sexual abuse doesn't really happen. They have a way of dealing with trauma. So if they've been chased by something, they go through a period of shaking, which just releases the whole thing, and then they just get on with their lives again.
Yeah,
so they don't imbibe these things mentally the way humans do, and the way that abusers can manipulate people. That you don't get that in the animal kingdom. You get fight or flight, and basically if they get away, then that's okay. They recover from it, and they recover quite quickly. So this idea of what goes into people long term is extremely important, and these traumas that build up and the abuse and the conflict within invites these entities into the person, and that can be through drug abuse, as we've talked about, especially methamphetamine. We talked to George Jagartic, who managed to cure himself. So go back in the archive and look at that. It's in the article that I mentioned at the beginning of the show. But yes, carry on, Jerry. I just thought I'd come in with that.
Yeah, well, that's very true. And you'll notice that, babies, young kids, before they develop language, aren't schizophrenic. Language is necessary. So they go to take over your thought stream. It's a battle for your attention and your thinking. And they'll inject negative thoughts into your thought stream. And we're taught from the time we're young kids that all our thoughts are our own. That's not right. That's very wrong. Psychology and psychiatry don't go into where thoughts come from, what they are. Thoughts are forms of energy. They have a specific frequency, just like light has a wide band of frequencies. Thought does too. It goes all the way from high frequency to low frequency, and these beings live in the very low frequency range. It's like going down into the Marianas Trench, in a bath escape and looking around. these entities dwell in that frequency, and they're very real in that frequency, despite everything that psychology and psychiatry say. So, I started asking this guy, how did they start off? He lowered his guard a little bit when he saw that I was interested. Now, so those therapists out there, when the patient actually senses that you're interested, they'll tell you more. If they think that you're judging them as a lunatic and you have nothing to say, they're going to shut you off, and they can feel that. They can feel that. They'll shut you off immediately. So he said they started telling me to do little things. And I've heard that before. I've heard patients say, well, when they first started off, they told me to pick up a pencil. They told me to sit in this chair. They told me to go over here, go over there. It was almost like somebody buying a new car, testing it out, to see what they could make it do, which I found very interesting. And I asked them, well, did they eventually work up to telling you to do bigger things? He said, yes. What were the things they worked up to telling you? Well, they mostly told me that other people were out to hurt me and to watch out for other guys. Okay, so this fellow was hanging around with gangsters. He was in prison, and they don't call paranoid schizophrenia paranoid for nothing. One of the biggest things the voices do is make the person paranoid. And
that's to isolate the victim, presumably, to isolate them further.
Isolate them further, make them paranoid. So there's no interference with their extracting that negative emotional energy. And that's one of the worst things a schizophrenic can do, is isolate themselves. But that's what they do. They lock themselves in the bedroom. They cause a big stink. Nobody wants to deal with them. They do crazy things. They say crazy things. They get violent. They lock themselves in the room, and everybody's like, yeah, I'm glad he's in the room. And that's what they want. They don't want any interference from family members. They want to break up families. They want to break up girlfriends. They want to break up all relationships except for them. So you'll find these guys isolating themselves, and you'll hear them in the bedroom talking, screaming at the voices, arguing with the voices. That's what the voices want. They want no outside interference. The first thing they'll go after when psychiatry prescribes a drug is they'll tell the patient, he's poisoning you, and they'll point to the side effects. And lots of patients will go off those drugs for that reason. So, that one of the things they say is, people are out there after you. They're watching you. They don't like you. They're talking behind your back. They'll say all these things to generate that negative emotional energy.
I think many people can actually relate to that, Jerry, because paranoia is not a rare thing. I mean, most people at some point will go, I wonder if they were talking about me when I was out of the room. And sometimes it happens to everybody. And the thing about it is that when you escalate these things and these voices take over, I think it's a very important point that we've made a few times as well, is most people at some time will have these negative voice intrusions. Yes. It's not uncommon. You will get a thought out of nowhere and go, God, where did that come from? I would never have thought to do anything like that. That's not a natural thought. It's not in my normal process of thought. Something just comes in to do something really extraordinarily bad. And I think most people have had that. But when these voices actually get into the person through this abuse and through persistence, when they find their victim, basically, they harass the victim until the victim is completely worn down. And I've seen the results of that. So yes, please carry on. Yeah, they wear them down. They don't allow them to sleep. And what's so tricky about it is that they come across as the person's same thoughts. I mean, they don't sound, a lot of times they don't sound any different than the person's regular daily thoughts. The intention is very different. What they're telling the person to do is very different, but they sound just like the person's regular thoughts. Now, the trick there is, we're all taught that whatever thoughts come into our head belong to us. It's just an assumption. Yes. It's a very wrong assumption. Thoughts come from... absolutely. And I think it's the awareness of being able to realize that, which is part of the cure. And we're going to get into how that works with these cases. Yeah. Well, one of the way you can see it for yourself is you can step back and watch your thoughts come into your head. Right? Yes. So if you're the one watching, you can't be the thoughts. That's right.
You're the person listening to and watching those thoughts, and that's the same thing with schizophrenia. If they can step back and watch those thoughts, they realize they are not those thoughts.
Exactly, and that is a point which I arrived at, and it's hard to understand for a lot of people because they are kind of ruled by their thoughts in a way. They have this constant stream of stuff, but I removed that a long time ago. It does take quite a while to be able to do it, but then you have an open awareness. So if anything comes in, you can notice it. But of course, when people think that these thoughts are part of them, then they can't differentiate at all. And that is how these negative entities get control, isn't it?
Yep, it is. And they want you to believe that their thoughts are your thoughts. And the patients who've asked them, who are you? What are you? They would say, we are you. So they don't want people to be able to differentiate those thoughts. Their survival depends on that. So what psychiatry usually tells them to do is take your medicines and ignore them. The first time I saw that, I pulled the patient back after I watched the psychiatrist do that. I brought him in a week later and said, well, how'd that work for you? Because I didn't know. He said, it made them worse. You can't ignore them. They get louder.
Right.
So that's what he said. If I ignore them, they get angry, they get louder. That's a very common thing that happens.
And if you confront them, it's worse.
Well, yeah. If you do anything that interferes with their draining your energy, they get mad. They start getting more animated. They don't want you doing anything to interfere with their draining of your energy.
Which actually ties into the behavior of somebody who was suffering from these voices that we both know. And it was almost a reflection of what was going on in her head when someone was trying to help. It would be the absolute opposite reaction of what you would expect. It would be hostility and absolute craziness when you were trying to help somebody out of this as well.
Right. The voices don't want you interfering with what they're doing. So I asked this fella, well, have the voices ever gone away for any length of time since they first started? He said, no, they constantly bothered me. I tried to kill myself twice. So suicidal thoughts are one of the biggest anxiety provokers there is. It's not easy to kill yourself. And thinking about it is very anxiety provoking. So they're constantly putting in these suicidal thoughts. And schizophrenics have a suicide rate of 3 to 5 times that of the normal population. And mostly because these voices are telling them to kill themselves. And it generates a massive amount of negative emotional energy. So where things get schizophrenic with psychiatry is they will insist these voices are hallucinations. But if they find out that a patient on their watch is considering killing themselves, they don't want to be saddled with that. So all of a sudden those voices become very real. They lock them up, fill them full of drugs, and don't let them out until they tell them, I'm not suicidal anymore. So they're saying one thing, but they're doing another.
I think this is almost like the way people don't deal with problems as well, as an analogy, because if you kind of go, oh, I'm just going to get drunk and forget about it, it's almost the same thing. The problem's still going to be there when you sober up. The same with the drugs, right? Yep. This is the thing that's not being addressed. So they're basically not addressing the issue whatsoever. Yeah.
I've seen very few times where the drugs got rid of the voices temporarily. But as soon as they went off the drugs, they came right back with a vengeance. So those drugs don't cure anything. Psychiatry doesn't know the cause of schizophrenia. They don't know the cure, and they won't look at the voices because they're hallucinations. Who's going to study a hallucination? They got it covered pretty well. They've got the truth blocked, so the average man can't find it. Back in the older days, they would say, oh, it's they would do vinegar douches on females to try to get rid of the voices. They would do ECT and shock their brains. They would do all these horrible things.
The old Victorian cure for mania was to put people in a bath filled with ice,
Yes, bath full of ice. They'd hang them from their hands. See, but you could look at those treatments and see they didn't work.
No, it's a distraction. It's to
Yeah,
distract away
that's a
from the
distraction. So
actual real
what the
issue.
psychiatric mafia and big pharma have done is they moved this whole game away from where the average guy could take a look at the results. Now they come out with all these studies with all this psychobabble and all these false statistics and that the average guy can't understand. And they go, well, this is science. We know what's going on. The thing is, they don't know what's going on. They say it's a chemical.
Sorry to interrupt, Jerry, but someone's just put in quite a good point. They've said, is this the same condition a priest would do on an exorcism on someone? Well, it is, because we're talking about the same thing. We're talking about evil entities that have got control of a person. But exorcism, as you stated last time, is a kind of a short-term cure, because these things can come back unless they're dealt with in a very proper way by the victim.
Well, you need to know what they are, and like you were saying, this is a continuum kind of thing. It's a part of the human condition. Schizophrenics are not non-human, as psychiatry treats them a lot of times, like guinea pigs. They're part of the human condition. So you get those thoughts, like you were talking about, that invade your brain, and all of a sudden, you go, I wouldn't think that thought. That doesn't belong. I'd never act on anything like that. And you're horrified you have the thought. That's them hitting you, and notice that you get upset when you have those thoughts, and that energy is drawn away. So with exorcism, it may drive them away, but it doesn't keep them away, because they seek the same frequency. So you can drive them away, but if you don't teach the patient what to do about them and how to move in a more positive spiritual direction to change their frequency out of that low frequency band, they're going to come right back.
Yes.
So back to this fella. He said, I tried to kill myself 2 times. And I asked him, well, how'd you try to kill yourself, and what happened? He said, both times I tried to hang myself. One time I went out to the middle of the woods, about a mile from the nearest road, and hung a rope on a tree. There was no one around. I put the rope around my neck and I was hanging when a hunter appeared out of nowhere and cut me down. So this is something I've seen, especially in the ER, where something miraculous absolutely happens that interfered with a surefire suicide attempt. One guy had a .357 Magnum with all the cylinders loaded. He put it to his head and it went click. He pointed it at the ground and went bang. Put it to his head, click, at the ground, bang. And he goes, okay, I got it. And he stopped shooting. One lady ran her car in front of a train. It hit the train, threw it into another track, and another oncoming train hit the car again and threw it like 50 yards off the road. They had to cut her out of that car. Everything had gone wrong in her life, and she was in that car. And I asked her in the ER, I said, what were you thinking when you regained consciousness and you saw you were still alive? She said, I was furious. I was absolutely furious. I didn't want to be here. And she said, then I heard a voice say, everything is going to be okay. And she said she felt this great feeling of peace. And here she was sitting in front of me in the ER, and all she had was like a little bit of a black eye. And that was it. That was it. And I'm like, she got hit by 2 trains and all she got was a black eye. And those things were so common back then that they were like lobsters used to be. They used to use them for dog food. I should have written these stories down. I only can remember a handful of the more dramatic ones. But there were so many interferences by something that denied this person death. Hundreds of them, hundreds of cases like that, where just something miraculous happened that interfered with their killing themselves. One guy turned on the gas in his apartment. He was passing out when his sister miraculously showed up, who only came to visit him once every 6 months. Stuff like that.
Do you think that it's possible that the entities want to actually keep them alive ultimately, but they just want to put them through the horror and the trauma?
Well, I think it's both. And what I and unless they actually take their spirit and once they're dead and take it over, and become one of them, I never could figure out, because if they kill themselves, they cut off their food source.
Yes.
You know, that guy is no longer providing them negative energy.
And when this is the interesting thing, I don't think we've ever brought this up, but if the person dies, is the demon or entity still attached to the departed person?
See, I don't, maybe. Or
you see,
maybe
that is something, again, that is believed in by the Roman Catholic Church, because they got into some very dark areas with this when I was researching it. For instance, there are people, certain popes have got lead-lined coffins because they wanted to keep them in this dimension. This stuff is really believed by the priest class on this planet. So my question also is that I think that some people have these demons attached to them through these people. So in other words, the schizo, like the case we've talked about, where the demonic entity was actually attacking a third party and ruining everything, basically, that the third party was doing. So that it's not quite as simple as just the one person being the victim, because it seems to be that these people can attack other people through that person.
Yes. It's kind of, in some ways, it's similar to an alcoholic in the family. It destroys the whole family, you know, and you can't ignore it. There's no ignoring it. So I don't know. I don't know. It's either what you said, or they actually become one of these things and then are used against the human race further. But these things hate the human race. They don't do anything good for the human race. They hate us for some reason.
Well, they're parasites, aren't they? They're parasites energetically, so they need the energy anyway.
Right.
There was a great book that came out, Private Ritchie. It was a fella who died, and it was a famous book in the 50s about somebody who was in an RAF hospital in America, and he'd been drafted, and he got very ill in hospital, and he saw himself leaving his body, and he went around the whole hospital of this place and the whole complex, and he saw his comrades getting drunk in the bar, and he could see the spirits jumping into these men as they got drunker and drunker.
I've heard that over and over.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it does tie into things that cross over, but I think we should stick to the point here. But I think all this is kind of, it's very interesting and essential to have a little bit of exposition as to the broader picture of how this works, because it's not just something that happens to a person. It's something that can have repercussions which can go across a whole series of events.
Which, it's like throwing a rock into a pond. The disturbance spreads out and affects everybody in a negative way that is in contact with this person.
Yes.
You know,
so in other words, it's like a virus. It's like what they'd call a virus. It's like a negativity virus that just spreads out and affects everything. Yeah, I've experienced that, unfortunately. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. One schizophrenic guy can tear up an entire family and anybody who comes in contact with them in a negative fashion.
Yeah.
You know? So this guy hung him. He put a noose around the tree, and he said, I put a rope around my neck and I was hanging when a hunter appeared out of nowhere and cut me down. And I asked him, well, what did you think about the timing of that incident? And he said it was a miracle. I said, did you get a feeling that somebody was watching over you? And he said, yes. I said, who? And he said, God. And this has happened a number of times. A lot of schizophrenics don't believe in a God. And if they do, the voices go crazy when they try to read the Bible or when they try to go to church. Now, what kind of hallucination would do that? And I asked him, do you believe in God? He said, yes. I said, did you make any other suicide attempts? He said, yes. And one of the common things that the voices tell these patients is that you're worthless, nobody loves you, you're a burden on everybody around you, your life is screwed up, you're stupid, you're ugly, you can't function. Just go ahead and kill yourself. Do it. Just do it. I mean, this is common for them to say. I've heard this from scores of schizophrenic patients, that the voices were telling them to kill themselves. So I asked this fellow, did you make any other attempts? He said, yes. And I said, what happened? He said, I tried to hang myself in my garage. And what did you hang yourself with? A nylon rope. What happened? The rope broke twice. I said, what is it, a thick rope? He said, no, it's a regular rope, but it was old. I said, have you ever been sent to a psych hospital? He said, yes, twice. Are you hearing voices now? Sometimes, but the medicine keeps them down. So, the voices seem to want them dead, but they want to generate as much negative emotional energy as they can in the process. So it's real common for them to tell them, hang yourself, or you're worthless. So like I said, the suicide rate for schizophrenics is 3 to 5 times that of the normal population. But interesting enough, the suicide rate of psychiatrists is virtually exactly the same. It's like two sides of a coin.
Yes.
So I asked him, are you hearing voices now? And he says, sometimes, but the medicine keeps them down. So that's what these drugs do. They're major tranquilizers. They're phenothiazines for 10, 15 years after they were discovered by accident in one of the dye labs in Europe. They had no idea why they worked at all. So back in the 70s, one of the big drug companies who came out with an antidepressant, said, well, we got a pill that affects depression, and it affected it just a little bit more than random that they would find with a sugar pill. So they went, okay, it works better than a sugar pill, not much better, but it works better. So it must be a chemical imbalance that we're dealing with. So they made up this chemical imbalance myth, and they sold it to the entire population. And it's a complete lie. They've never found a chemical imbalance. And when I was working at the state hospital, I'd ask them, all the psychiatrists, what causes this? Oh, it's a chemical imbalance. But not once did I see them give any kind of lab work, any kind of clinical test, an EEG, EK, nothing, no test before they started prescribing their drugs that were supposed to be putting these guys back in balance mysteriously somehow. Once I investigated, I'd have found out there are no tests for this chemical brain imbalance. There's no way to prove it. Matter of fact,
people repeat these things, Jerry. They repeat them as though they're real. I mean, a friend of mine, her brother was having some problems, and she said, well, it's just a chemical imbalance, but she could never define what it meant because it's a meaningless term. It doesn't mean anything. There's no objective kind of measurement for that. You can't measure it. It's very similar to what's going on at the moment. Yeah. Yeah.
They have no idea what the chemical imbalance of the brain should be, even. There's 50 different chemicals in there. There's 50 different neurotransmitters and all. They have no idea what the balance should be. Yet they put out this lie. They teach it in the medical schools. It's passed from generation to generation to generation because they have to have a physical cause. If they don't have a physical cause, people are going to start asking, well, what is it you're treating? And they don't know. They have no idea what it is they're treating. They're just drugging down the brain. They're blaming everything on the brain. But when people who died and come back, their bodies go dead, but they can still think.
Yes.
They're still thinking. So thought is not a physical process. It comes from the spirit. It comes from the energetic being that lives in there.
Yes.
But here they are saying, oh yeah, the brain is a thought. Nobody's ever found a thought in the brain. Out of all the autopsies they've ever done, nobody's ever found a thought in the brain. It's another lie that they're putting out that helps them sell drugs. They don't care about curing people. They care about selling drugs and making a fortune. Matter of fact, they've cut the research funding for schizophrenia down to a dribble. They don't want a cure. They don't make money from a cure. They make money selling toxic drugs. And a lot of...
Well, you could say the same about cancer research. I mean, the cancer rate is the highest it's ever been. And they've been allegedly researching it for over 100 years. So
they don't want to cure.
That's right.
The people who found cures either had their labs destroyed or
Well, they're found
mysteriously
dead.
disappeared.
Yes, yes.
Just like with the free energy guys. Anybody who
Yeah.
who got on the free energy, their labs were destroyed. They were threatened, and they didn't allow it to get out.
No.
So I went on to talk to this guy. I said, "Can you tell the difference between the voices and your own thoughts?" And he said, "Yes." I said, "Well, who are they?" He said, "They're voices." I said, "Did the medications the psychiatrists give you weaken them?" He said, "Yes." That is true. It usually weakens them, but it does not get rid of them. So it weakens them to different degrees, and sometimes not much at all. So I asked him, are the voices still there? And he said, yes, they come as thoughts and not as voices outside. So I found that interesting, is when the voices are really strong and they're no longer worried about the patient interfering with them, they will actually move outside the person's head, like 2-3 feet away, and talk to them from outside of their heads, like a separate entity, like a ghost. And that really freaks them out. It's like, then they know, okay, it's not me. This is something else, which they don't want. The voices don't want these people to understand that until they have pretty much control of them. So once they have control, they'll move outside a lot of times and speak to them from a point outside of their heads.
And this was relayed to you, wasn't it, by this subject?
Yeah, well, not just him, but several others.
Right, yeah.
I said, can you tell the difference between them and your own thoughts? Once they move inside. So once he took the medications, they moved from outside to inside his head. And then I asked him, can you tell the difference between them and your own thoughts? And he said, yeah, but it's much more confusing. And that's one of the big traits of schizophrenia. They're really confused. Yes. And it looks like they're not paying attention to what people are telling them because they're hearing other voices at the same time you're talking. So it's like they're distracted, and so that explains a lot of the confusion that's part of the diagnosis. I said, what do they tell you when you're on your meds and they're not coming from outside of your head? He said, they tell me that people are out to get me and that those people want to hurt me. Again, we got the generation of negative emotional energy and negativity there. And when you're off your meds and you listen to what the voices are telling you to do, when you do follow through with what they're telling you and get in trouble for it, I asked, what do they do? How do they react? He said, they laugh at me. They tell me I'm stupid. And this is common. I've had 2 patients where the voices told them that if you gouge out one of your eyes, we'll leave and we won't come back. One of them did that. He gouged out one of his eyes and disfigured himself really bad. And I asked, well, what did the voices do after you did that? He said, they laughed at me, they mocked me, they said, how could you be so stupid as to do this? And they laughed at him and they mocked him. So here's this guy disfigured himself for life, and these things are doing this. The other guy, they just told him to do it. He didn't do it. So
an interesting point you made, Jerry, when we were talking just before the show about one of these cases, which I think is relevant here to bring in now, was that one of the victims was bargaining with the voices for an allotted time where they could speak to him. He wasn't dictating that they could speak to him. He was trying to bargain with them, wasn't he, at a time where they could actually converse with him to leave him alone, right?
Yeah.
Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, they won't go for that. They don't want any restrictions.
No.
The only time they'll go for something like that is when we got them on the ropes, that we've disrupted the patterns enough to where they know they're losing ground. They're being starved out. The guy is no longer feeding them. He's using the That's a Lie program. He realizes that they are not who he is. There's a series of other things that they can do to fight back against the voices. But they have to realize that they're not them first. They have to realize that these things are not who they are. This is a separate entity with a separate mind. Try attacking the victim. Once they're on the ropes, then they start bargaining. Oh, we'll leave you alone. We'll only come a certain amount of time a day. Just don't get rid of us. and they start pleading and begging. You can't trust any bargain you make with them. None. Zero. They will not keep it. They have no ethics. They have no morals.
And the other side of the story is that example that we gave early on. You related this fellow who'd cured himself of the voices and got lonely and invited them back. And that must have been devastating for you after all that work.
I was in disbelief. I was in total disbelief. We worked for like 6 months, and back then I was still learning about these things. So we finally got rid of them. And I remember I can see clearly how he reacted once they left. So he's sitting in his chair, and then he kind of gets disoriented and almost falls out of the chair. And I go, well, what's happening? He said, they left. They screamed as they left. They're gone. And he's sitting there looking with a stunned look on his face. And I said, what's going on? And he said, the silence is deafening. Because he'd been hearing them for 40 years. And all of a sudden, his mind is silent. So
I think this is a really good point, Jerry, because most people don't know what it's like not to have any thoughts. And as I said, because I worked on it for such a long time, it's not an uncommon thing. It's not difficult to do. But it takes vigilance to be able to realize the difference between your awareness and what's coming into it. So that is the way to recognize it as an invasion. And I kept trying to help this person that we both know to do that. But the will wasn't there to start with. And also the ability to even comprehend what I was talking about, because they were still working and being triggered by these basic negative emotions all the time.
So what it is a battle for the patient's attention. They want to control the attention. They won't allow the person to drive his own attention. They want to influence. So they steer that attention to negative stuff. They want them watching negative movies. They want them reading murder mysteries. They want them concentrating on negative aspects of they'll tell people constantly, they'll tell them negative things about themselves and everybody else around them. So they're trying to control that attention. So it's a battle for the patient's attention. That's where the struggle lies. It's because you are your attention. That's basically what you are. You focus your attention, and the mind takes a snapshot of what you're focusing your attention on. And what John Mace says, which is very interesting, is the mind isn't what we've been taught it is. It basically takes pictures. It'll take a picture of what you focus your attention on, and it's not the mind that analyzes that picture. It's the spirit of the individual. The mind's function is only to take a picture of what you look at. Wherever you put your attention, that picture comes into focus, and all the other pictures drop out. It's almost like a slideshow. Boom, boom, one picture after another. And as you switch your attention, other pictures drop out. So what Mace says is that during a trauma, your attention focuses down to yourself and burns kind of like a rut in your memory of that traumatic incident. If that doesn't feel good, so the individual tries to push that out of mind, and it goes into the subconscious and becomes an energy ridge that will be triggered by anybody with that same ridge, and it eats up your energy. So by pushing back against it, depending on how many of those you have, your energy is drained. And people with a lot of those ridges are very depressed and low energy. And these entities, these voices, play those ridges like a fiddle. They can go in the patient's head and they can pull up these images and rub them in their face until they generate negative emotional energy. And then they drain it off time after time after time. But the patient doesn't realize that. And when I was first experimenting with this, I didn't know what was going on. I thought it was the anxiety that created that lack of energy. I found out later pretty clearly that it was not, that these things were taking the energy. So I would ask the schizophrenic patient, I said, well, okay, you've experienced these voices coming thousands of times. Every time your energy level has dropped to zero, who's taking your energy? They'd say, I don't know. They couldn't see it. They were being blocked from seeing that there was a one-to-one correspondence between the voices coming and their energy disappearing.
It's a very similar situation in a way that plays out in real life, though, because we have that now with all these footballers dropping dead, and everyone's just going to say, well, there's just a rise in heart attacks among footballers, you know. It's blocking off the actual reality. So
yeah,
in
the
other
actual
words,
correlation.
Yeah, there's no, they're taking away all the direct causation and distracting it. And that's very similar to this. Very, very similar, isn't it?
Yeah, in a lot of ways. You know? So that's interesting that they don't see that. So here's you got thousands, tens of millions of schizophrenics on the planet who are being drained by these things and have no idea that there's a one-to-one correspondence between the attacks of these voices and their energy level going down to nothing. And the voices don't want them to know that, so they block it. You know, they can block your memory. Matter of fact, in the patients I work with, I make them write down a number of things that they need to do to fight the voices. Because if I don't, by the time they leave, they've forgotten 85% of what I tell them to do. It's wiped from their memory if they don't write it down.
Exactly, and that's what I was talking to you about a while ago. I mean, with the case that we are both familiar with, the horror of what the person did was never the issue. It was, why are you treating me like this? It was a complete dissociation from the reality of what had happened.
Yeah, it's everybody else's fault.
Dissociation, it got wider. So at first, I think there was a memory of what had happened, but that just even got more dissociated as time went on, as the behavior got more frequent and worse, as this thing took over more. There was no comprehension of what had happened afterwards.
Yeah, and that's pretty common too. The first time I saw something like that, I remember I was talking to one prisoner whose voices convinced him to kill himself. So what he did is he got a pistol, and the voices told him, well, drive out into the desert till you run out of gas, and then get out of your car and kill yourself, shoot yourself in the head. So he did that. He drove until he ran out of gas. He went out to the desert, took his gun, and he cocked the gun, and he was about ready to shoot himself when this bird came out of nowhere. And he said it was a strange bird. He lived in the desert all his life. He said he'd never seen a bird like this before, and it started screaming at him. So he got the pistol, and he pointed it at the bird, and he fired. And the explosion from the shot woke him up. So it's like he was hypnotized, and he woke up, and he's looking with this gun in his hand, and he goes, what was I going to do? You know, what was I about to do? So there's kind of this hypnotic effect that they have on these people also. Yeah, it's like a spell. You know, it's like they're being controlled.
I think that's the key to the whole thing, is awareness of being controlled, and that goes through everything in life. It goes through propaganda. It goes because the propaganda that we're experiencing at the moment throughout the world is exactly the same as these voices.
Yeah.
And people are so conditioned to it that they're accepting it as reality, and they're believing it all.
Well, yeah, if you look at the patterns that I just read, they match. There's a one-to-one correspondence between what the mainstream media and the deep state are pummeling us with right now. It's the same entity on a macroscopic level. You know, it's attacking all of us now, not just schizophrenics. You know, that one-to-one correspondence, you just go back through those, you'll see it's the exact same thing the mainstream media is doing to us right now.
Which is why this is so important, because people are being assaulted in the same way as these unfortunate people who have these entities attack them. That entity is the media. That entity is the propaganda that's attacking them now. And it's consistently negative, it's gaslighting, and it's lying.
Exactly the same pattern. You know, the governments of the world have been taken over by this entity. And this is a spiritual battle. This is a spiritual battle. You know what's going, and so is schizophrenia. It's the same thing. So I asked this guy, I said, and what do you think the voices are? Or and he says, well, I don't know. And I said, well, what's your gut feel about what you think they are? And he responds with one word. He said, demons. So what I've found is about a third of the patients I work with, this is roughly just guesstimating, about a third of them think they're demons. You know, about a third don't know what they are. They're not sure what they are. They know they're not good. They don't know where they come from. And they're terribly bothered by them, but they don't know what they are. And then the worst off of the entire bunch are the third that believe they're hallucinations.
Yeah.
They're the worst off. They're the most disturbed. They're the ones that stay on the medications and don't do anything about them because they're being told that they have a broken brain and that there's nothing that can be done with a broken brain other than drug it. And it's a lie. So the fact that the voices run patterns flies in the face of psychiatry's propaganda that these things are hallucinations. Hallucinations don't run patterns. So I'm going to move into the second session with this fella. And he starts off with, when he comes in, he says, I'm having drug dreams, but there's another side in the dreams and that are telling me not to use. So that's interesting. Here you have a positive and negative forces coming into play here. What I've seen is that schizophrenics have a lot of nightmares, and they wake up in the middle of the night with a nightmare. These things don't want these people to sleep. They want to wear them down, and if they can wear them down from not allowing them to sleep, then they don't have the energy to resist and do anything else. They're just drained. So that they do that by instilling nightmares, not allowing the guy to get to sleep. They wake up at 2, 3 in the morning, which is the time these things hit the hardest. And they're wide awake, and the voices start in on them. You're stupid, you're ugly, and break up their sleep. So they actually they install these nightmares. So the dreams become a battleground between light and dark forces. And there's a high correspondence between schizophrenics and nightmares. So I tell him, it sounds to me like positive spirits are trying to help you with these drug dreams. Now there's plenty of drugs in the prison, and this fellow has been using drugs for years. He doesn't want to go back to them. And if you run up a drug debt in the prison and you don't pay it off, you're liable to end up with a knife in your back. Mm-hmm. So he doesn't want to get into that again. And I tell him, well, you might want to take that into consideration. I said, how you been doing the battle with the voices this week? He said, they keep coming. So they always left my office with homework, stuff that they needed to do to fight the voices. And again, they had to write them all down because they'd forget them. He said they keep coming about 45 minutes a day, 3 or 4 times a day. They show up. So this was a vast improvement from where they were. When we started, he was hearing them all the time, 24 hours a day. So what happens is as they start improving and the voices start losing ground, we start starving them out. The patient begins improving, and they become less and less often, and they're not as strong. And the nightmares begin to decrease. So I asked him, well, what are the voices telling you now? And he said, they're telling me that I need them, which is something that they do commonly. You need us. You can't get by without us. We're helping you. We're protecting you. We're your friends. And this is the kind of propaganda they're running through there. They claim the power a lot of times to do things that they can't do. So they'll say, oh, somebody's going to get murdered, and it shows up in the paper the next day. So a lot of times they'll claim they can't to do things that they can't do, but they're things they can do that are supernatural. I've seen that a number of times. One of the common ones, they tell drug inmates when they ran out of meth, they tell them where to go, when to be there to get more. They tell them which houses to rob, generally where the loot was, when the person was up. So in this case, I'll get into that later on. But yeah, they tell them things that the person himself could not have known. So,
yeah, they have access to the whole of the memory of the person.
Well, it's not just the memory. Again, they're in an energetic universe where there is no barriers with time or space. So they can see what's going on.
Yes.
Physical obstacles are no uh, no obstacle to them. So they can see when somebody gets up. They can see where the loot's stashed. They can see who will come and give drugs. They can get into the mind of drug dealers and say, be at this place at a certain time. They can do stuff like that.
Yes, but conversely, maybe there's something working on the other side, because I've experienced the miracles that have happened to me dealing with some of this stuff when I was in deep trouble with it.
Yeah, there is. Everybody's got two guardian angels, but they can't come and help you unless you ask. They can't barge in like these things and just come and take over and urge you to do things. You have to ask. And the only time I've really seen them, for the most part, break in is when the guy's about to kill himself. Then they'll jump in there and they'll prevent it. In a lot of cases, the guy actually kills himself. So here's the voices telling this felon, you need us. And then they go, we miss you. And the patient says, well, it's the same old crap over and over. I said, I fell for this crap before. I'm not going to fall for it again. He said, I'm not going to be their milk cow anymore. So, I explained to him that concept, that they're just draining you like we drain milk from a cow. They set the cow out into the pasture, he eats grass, he produces milk. We isolate him and drain him, and then send him back out to the pasture to produce more milk. And that's exactly what these things are doing. They isolate the patient, they drain him, and then they send him back out to eat food and generate more emotional energy, because they can't produce it themselves. They can't make the energy themselves. They're totally dependent on us.
Yeah,
they're parasites.
Yeah, they're a parasite. Yeah.
So once the patient realizes they're a parasite, that changes the whole dynamic.
Yeah.
If you had a big leech on you, and it was sucking your blood, you wouldn't just sit there and look at it. You wouldn't just say, oh, yeah, it's a big leech. So what? You'd do something about it. Well, it's the same thing with patients and these things. When they realize that these things are parasites sucking their energy, they don't like it.
Yeah.
They go, well, I need to do something about this. And that's what these things don't want. They don't want any interference.
Yes, hence the wiping of the memory and the confusion that surrounds it, because that was something I just couldn't get through in the end with the case that we're familiar with. It just couldn't get through.
Yeah.
And I was astonished about that, because it was literally like a brick wall was there, and it was covering up the blatantly obvious. Everything except the issue was being talked about.
Right. And it gets blamed on everybody else.
That's right. Blamed on everybody else. It all gets
projected out to everybody else. It's their fault. They did it to me. That I'm innocent. They're bastards. Da, 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 da. So it's all thrown out on everybody else to drive them away.
Yes, it's like the insanity of it is so reversed. Like you're being attacked with a knife or something, and they say, "Why are you doing this to me?"
Yeah. Yeah.
And that is such a shock within itself, because it's a reversal of reality. So that also has a huge effect on somebody who's been attacked by one of these people who's in turn being attacked, right? Yeah. Because you go, this is that, am I going insane here? I just can't work this out.
I've had that feeling a bunch of times. I tell you, a bunch of times. It's like, am I losing my mind? I mean, what is, and there's nobody I could talk to until I met Sherry.
No.
So it was like years of experiencing these things and talking to the voices and being attacked by the voices. And the only people who understood were the schizophrenics. So I was going, am I losing my mind? I mean, nobody else understands this except these guys that the psychiatry say are psychotics and lunatics and that, have nothing to say, but they were the only ones who were really understood. Like until I met Sherry, and Sherry didn't tell me that she was hearing voices for 10 years. I knew her 10 years before she finally admitted that she was hearing voices when she was a younger woman. And that was when I was telling her one day, we were talking, and I was telling her about one case at the prison. I said, I just can't figure this out. This is, then she go, oh, I know all about that. And I'm like, what? She go, oh, yeah, I heard voices when I was younger. And I didn't believe her, because she's one of the most spiritually advanced people I know. So I started hammering her with questions that only somebody who was hearing voices could answer. And it was like, bam, 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 bam. And I was just like amazed. So that's how deeply these things run. Don't tell anybody. If you're hearing voices, don't tell anybody, because they'll think you're a nutcase. But like with George, he told his family, and the voices hated that. So he got the support of his family, who didn't reject him or force him to take medications, or they just gave him support and said, well, okay, and helped him out that way. So, and the voices hated that. So they never could really fully take him over because of that. So I asked this fellow, I said, did you ever challenge them as to their milking your energy like a bunch of parasites? And he said, no, I'm not going to even give them that much. They did say that they didn't want me to have that information, which is interesting. Here they are telling him they didn't want him to know that. He said, but it wouldn't drive them away. So just knowing that alone wasn't enough. So they did say, and all the voices agreed, that the information you gave me about them being parasites and milking me of my energy did interfere with their relationship with me. They all agreed to that, which is
all of them. Now, this is an interesting point, because some of these patients have more than one voice, right?
Yes.
We haven't really addressed that yet. Maybe we should bring that in now.
Well, the more voices they hear, the more disturbed they are. And the voices have different strengths. Some of them are very strong, some of them are very weak. And what happens as you start working with these concepts, that if you can get rid of the voices by any means whatsoever, any means, all symptoms of schizophrenia vanish with them. It's the voices that drive this disorder. It's not any kind of physical anything. This is an energetic thing. It blocks the spirit. It blocks the energy. It robs the person of the energy and blocks them from their true self.
Yes. I could see the person who was originally there, and I was trying to get through to that person, but there was too much in the way.
Yeah, I remember one I worked with, it took me an hour to get through to the person who used to be there. And when I was done, it was like, they're never coming back. They're gone. They're gone. And for those kind of people, the only thing that they really have to keep them under control are these major tranquilizers, these toxic major tranquilizers. So you can't say they don't have any use. The other good thing about them, and there's not many, is that a person who I can't reach, when they're off meds, when they're sedated with these drugs, which are slowly rotting out their nervous system, I can reach them during that time, where I wouldn't be able to reach them otherwise. And we've been able to save a bunch of them that way, but they had to stay on their meds until they got well enough to not need them. But then psychiatry, there's a couple of times where they would tell their psychiatrist, well, the voices are gone. I don't need these meds anymore. No, we're going to keep you on the meds. We'll just keep you on the same dose. Like they didn't believe them, that it was possible. They do not believe that it's possible to get rid of these hallucinations. It's like once they got them, they got them for life. And they got that stuck in their head. They can't look at it from any other viewpoint than what they were programmed in medical school, and what they all believe. It's like this big, what do you call it, gang, the psychiatric mafia. So
somebody just put a question in, Jerry,
okay.
And it was somebody who said that they have nightmares if they stop smoking cannabis. I don't quite know what they were asking because it went by quite quickly, but is there anything you've got to say about that?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is that the voices several times have said they don't like the person smoking cannabis because it calms them down. And there's no real withdrawal effect. What they want is people to use drugs that have a nasty withdrawal, like alcohol, where every ounce of alcohol you drink, you got a 2-hour sedative effect and then a 10-hour low-key nervous withdrawal. So if you drink a 6-pack of beer, your nervous system doesn't get back to normal for 60 hours. They want that nervous system jangling and irritable and edgy. And it's the same thing with if they want them using meth, they want them using cocaine, they want them using drugs where there's a horrible withdrawal, because they can jump in there and then they can fuel the fire. Marijuana doesn't do that. The only times I've seen marijuana do something bad with schizophrenics is with the ones that are really unstable. The ones that are just really on edge. It might push them over, if they're, but for the most part, it relaxes them, and they don't want the person relaxed. So they don't want them using marijuana. They want them using some other drug that has a nasty side effects and withdrawal.
These hybridized kind of engineered versions of marijuana are quite dangerous, I think, like skunk, because that does push people into psychosis. Yeah, you got to watch and make sure it's pure stuff. And then what is they use over here? Something called sherm, which is some kind of hallucinogen that they keep changing the chemical formula for. So they can't, they outlaw one chemical formula and they produce another. And I've watched them come into the ER just bouncing off the walls, and I'm going, what is this? It wasn't psychosis. It was just such a weird, it wasn't meth, wasn't anything. I remember the first time I ever saw it. I didn't know what it was or what was going on with the guy. I pulled him in and I grilled him until he told me, well, I was using sherm. They have one over here called spice. And that's been a big problem in these northern cities. Yeah, that's what it was, spice. So I don't know what to say about him having nightmares when he smokes marijuana, other than stop smoking it. What's giving you nightmares? Stop it. The other point that came up was a question: have you got an audio book? Yeah, you can get our book from Amazon.com. You can get the the verbal version. So basically, it's got a voice that you can. Yeah, it's voice. So what do they call it? Amazon's got a name for it. An ebook. Yeah, but is it an audio book that actually reads the book? I think you can get an audio book, basically. Yeah, it's an audio book. So I think you can get certain readers that will actually read the book. They'll actually read it for you. Yeah, that's a bit like a PDF file then, because a PDF file you can get to be read out loud, can't you? Yeah. So you can use that setting and have that happen. So that answered that question. Okay, we can move on now. Yeah. Okay. Let me see, where was I here? They all agreed that this fella, knowing that they were parasites, changed their relationship with him. Okay, so that's one of the things that needs to be brought out, that these things are parasites, because it changes the patient's relationship with them when that happens. So it also clarifies kind of what's happening to them and where their energy is going. And I asked him, was it where your voices came through and told me not to interfere with their way of life? So I got him confused with another patient. He said, no, but they told me that much. So they were telling him that I was interfering with their way of life. They also told me that without them, I was nothing. There were 3 of them at the time. So interesting. This is an interesting point. How did you know there were 3? So all the voices have different characteristics, different personalities. But they are pretty much always in this same mold, right? Yeah, and what they will do is they'll talk behind the guy's back, and they'll go, well, should we kill him now, or should we wait? Well, let's kill him. You'll have this conversation that they're carrying on, that the patient can hear. So the conversation is between the voices, not necessarily between the patient and the voices. So they talk behind your back and you can hear them, basically. Yeah, you can hear them. But what's interesting is that the voices in one person's head can't hear the voices in another person's head. They can't talk to each other crosswise. No. Which is interesting that way. And as this process we've developed takes effect on the voices, the weaker ones start dropping out first, and then the stronger ones are the ones that you go after later. But once they're gone, that one's gone. I suppose an interesting point is, where do they actually go? I mean, these things are presumably in the ether somewhere, and that's always fascinated me too, where these things are actually contained.
Well, that's a good question. What comes to mind is, I don't know whether they go somewhere else or whether they just dissipate. Where does a thought go once you think it?
Yes.
It's a form of energy.
I like what you said on, I think, the last one we did, where you said they have these consistent patterns, almost like they've been trained in some demonic university somewhere.
Yeah. It's like a cookie cutter. I mean, they're all running the same patterns.
And they've all got the same qualification, and they're very much like academics because they can't move outside it. So they're actually quite predictable.
Yeah. What was it that threw me for a loop once? Let me see if I can pull that up. Since what I would do in the ERs, I mean, the ERs didn't want you working with these people. They wanted you to get them out of there, because the doctors didn't know what to do with them. They're clogging up the ERs. So there was one gal. Oh, come on. I just had it on the tip of my tongue. Oh, okay. Where I got to the point where I knew what they were going to say when I told the patient that they were energetic parasites. If they're going to blow up, they're going to blow up at that point. They don't want the patient to know that. And there's always a volatile reaction when I go to tell the patient that. And I had to be very careful in the ER with that, because if one of them, and it did happen, but I didn't, I knew it was going to happen, and I gave them the option. So before I told any of them that these things were energetic parasites and pointed out why, I would tell them, you're free to leave. I'm not going to stop you. I'm not going to give you any trouble. And that was the same way with prisoners. I'd say, you're free to leave. You can come back later. I'm not going to get you in trouble. I'm not going to turn you into the cops. I'm not going to cause any problem for you. If you can't handle this, just walk out until you cool down, and we'll get back to it later. So I told this one gal that, who I later found out murdered the person who sexually molested her daughter. And I said, well, listen, I'm going to tell you some stuff that I think you're going to be able. I had to be real careful about who I gave this information to, because there's some people that just couldn't handle it. I thought she could. So I said, I'm going to tell you something about the voices that you need to know. But this is how they're going to react. First of all, they're going to tell you I'm stupid, I'm crazy. Don't listen to anything I have to say. I'm a nutcase. If you stay around and you listen, they're going to tell you to get up and leave. Get out of the office, run, escape the ER. If you try to do that, the cops are going to stop you. You can't get out of here. It's a locked unit. And if you still listen, they're going to tell you to attack me. So she goes, well, I won't do that. And I said, well, I know you won't, but that's what they're going to say. So I tell her, and it rolls off just like I said it would, time after time after time. It was like if somebody told you, hey, Mark, you're going to stand on your head in 5 minutes and wet your pants. And you're going to go, well, that's bull of crap, But then it, you wouldn't do it. But these voices were unable to change the dialogue to prove me wrong, which blew my mind. I mean, they knew what I was going to say.
Yes.
All they had to do was not say it, but they couldn't do it. They could not react in those ways. So that was really intriguing, and I'm still like, it's like they're programmed. They can't respond other than how they've been programmed by whatever it was that programmed. It's like at that point the program breaks down.
Sherry's in the chat actually, and she's just said they can't.
That's interesting.
She said,
what'd she say? Let her talk.
She said they can't think for themselves, and they just repeat endlessly. Yeah.
Yeah. But they are sly with how they get people. They seem to have a number of different tactics they could use. And George's voices were some of the slyest I've ever dealt with. I mean, they would morph from one form to another, but you could see the general pattern is still to get the energy. You know, so
Yes.
it was like a U-boat trying to being chased by a destroyer. They kept turning back to home port. You know, once the destroyer loses it, you know that's the heading it's going on. You just got back on that heading and start searching for it again.
Somebody just put in that they're a bit like Saul Alinsky's rules for radicals. Well, exactly. That's what rules for radicals are. It's relentlessly agitating a target.
Yeah.
It's one of the rules for radicals. So that's a very good point. And also getting back to how this reflects society, the so-called big society and the communitarian society, which we're in, where individual rights are usurped for this invisible community, which doesn't and never has existed, are exactly the same. Because what they do is they just demonize people who don't go along with what they're doing, and they lie and they gaslight them and they obfuscate, but they have very limited tactics, like what you're saying. Once you know the tactics, you know what they're going to do. And I'm dealing with this all the time with public officials, because you know what they're going to do.
Right.
They're going to get to a point where they're going to lie so much that then they'll ignore you, and then you have to bring them back in with something that threatens them.
Right.
It's very, very similar, the whole thing. Yeah.
See, and when I started this off, I met a clinical psychologist he worked at a state hospital in California, and he took a very different tack from me. He was working in a private hospital, and he was trying to befriend the voices so he could get them to talk to him about what they were. You know, and after several patients, he got the same stuff over and over and over again. They don't come out as to what they were until you actually try to destroy them, and then because they're destructive to the patient. So I never even thought about befriending them. They were always the enemy. But Van Dusen tried to befriend them. And matter of fact, he even gave independently, he gave an MMPI, which is, you know, the gold standard for psychology's personality inventory, to the patient independently of the voices. So he told the patient, you answer this without any interference with the voices. And then he gave it to the voices and said, okay, I want the voices to take this. And voices took it. And he said the voices came out much more psychotic on both the MMPI and the Rorschach than the patient did, which was interesting.
Can you just explain who Van Dusen was? Because this was going back in your history somewhat. Some people might not know.
Well, Van Dusen was like myself, he was a student of Emanuel Swedenborg, who was a Christian mystic who lived some 300 years ago. And he had access to heaven and hell. So he would go into heaven and hell, and he would talk to the spirits in both those places, and then he would come back and he would write about what they were like. And what Van Dusen and I both saw was that what he was saying about these evil spirits matched exactly what we were seeing with the voices of schizophrenics. You know, so both of us are going, well, maybe it's the same thing. So we started poking around in the heads of schizophrenics in different ways, where I was challenging and trying to destroy them, and he was trying to make friends with them. And then he wrote about, you know, what he saw when he was trying to make friends with them. And at some point he went, well, I think I've learned everything I could about them, where I was still bringing stuff up. And I would send him that stuff, and we decided, well, we need to let people know about this. I mean, people need to be awakened to this. He was retired at that point, and we started writing a book, but then he had a fast-moving cancer, polished him off once we finished the third chapter. So he wanted this information out so badly that he wrote until he could no longer push the keys on the keyboard. That's how bad he wanted this information out. You know, and I told him I'll get it out one way or another. I'll get it out. So that's who Van Dusen was. He was a clinical psychologist.
Great. Okay. Yeah. That brings us back on track then. Yeah. We're talking really about these cases now.
Yeah.
which reflect the characteristics. Yeah.
So I ask him, how many voices are you dealing with in this session? Okay, so last time it was 3. This time it's 2. So 1 left. I said, what happened to the third one? He said, I don't know. He's been gone now for a while. Where'd he go? So I'm like, yeah, where'd he go? That's your question. Where'd they go? You want to know. Inquiring minds want to know. He says, I don't know. But like I said, the weaker voices drop out first, and they drop out successively from weakest to strongest, and the strongest ones are last. And I told this guy the story about another inmate, and the room crackled with electricity when the voices got angry with me. Asked him if the voices ever did anything like that to alter physical reality, and he said yes. They told me that this other inmate was going to get to know him, and that then he was going to get into a fight with him. So the voices are saying this specific prisoner on the yard is going to get to know you, and he's going to assault you. All right. So I asked him, did that actually happen? And he said, yeah, the voices told me twice that this would happen. And I said, how did the fight start? He said, did he just come up to you and attack you? He said, no, I was in the bathroom just after taking a shower. My hair was soaking wet, and I was whipping it back to get the water out. And the water from the cone flew backwards just as this guy walked into the bathroom. He said the water hit him in the face, and he said, I didn't know he was there. I splashed him by accident. And the guy opened the faucet and splashed water on him, and then attacked him and hit him in the head. He said, eventually I beat him down, but the voices were warning me that this guy was going to attack me. Was more evident that they have special powers that they could use in my behalf to protect me while I'm in prison. And that was common, you know, because what prison guards find out very quickly is that these guys are supernaturally strong. You know, they are much stronger when they're irritated than the average inmate. You know, and I told, you know, several stories about that. One prisoner that they put a quarter pepper spray on, they stunned him with a stun gun. They just
we brought that up in the last show, so you can hear the whole story in there.
Yeah, so they're supernaturally strong. Prison, the guards, you know, it's not long before they realize you don't mess with these guys. You know, you don't be twerking them. They said, well, how long after the voices told you that that you were going to get in a fight with this guy did it actually happen? He said 2 weeks. I said, how long did the fight last? He said about 4 minutes. I said, what happened next? He said, we fought and stayed enemies for a while. For a long time, I was wondering if the ordeal was over or not. I didn't know if I had to continually be watching for this guy coming up from behind me and hitting me. He said the voices came a couple of times, a couple of weeks after the fight, and told me this guy was going to come back and apologize, but that would take a while. He said the voices told me that someone in his family had died and that he was upset. At that time, I was wondering if the issue was over or if I had to continue to watch out for him. So the voices came and volunteered this information. They told me that there would be no more trouble out of him, and told me not to hold my breath and wait for an apology, but that the issue was over. He said that the guy approached him some 5 months later and apologized. So this is one of several reports where the voices knew stuff that the patient themselves didn't. You know, so again, these are energetic entities that operate in the energetic universe where there is no time, there is no space, there is no material. They know stuff that the patient couldn't know. George came to that conclusion one day where the voices were telling him that somebody knew his password on his computer. So he went to a friend and he said, change the password. So his friend changed the password in another room. And George said the voices told him that they changed the password to password. So he went in there and he goes, did you change the password to password? And he said, yeah, how'd you know that? The voices had told him that. So they know things that people don't know. Where generally where the loot is hidden, where to hide. but it's all for a negative purpose. You know, see, like a drug addict, he wants more drugs. You know, he's happy if he gets more drugs at a good deal. So the voices for them are like, hey, that's a good thing. Now I get more drugs. You know, I remember one where he went into a bar and it was in Tucson. It's shaped like a ship, and there were strippers in there, and the voices he was looking at the women, and there was one he was kind of attracted to, but the voices were saying, no, go get that one. It's that one. You don't want that one. So he took up with her, and he said she liked to be strangled while she was having sex. So, you know, the voices loved that. So he was strangling her at the same time, and she passed out. He thought he'd killed her. You know, so he was shocked until she regained consciousness, and he goes, I'm never going to do that again. So they do stuff like that too. You know?
Yeah, someone's just put in something that's quite interesting, actually, as a topic, a point to bring up. Can intuition be one of these voices? Can people mistake intuition for these voices? Because I think that's quite an interesting point, because a lot of people who do this channeling, they don't know what they're picking up. But I think intuition is more of a kind of, it manifests itself almost physically if you are tuned into something. It's like intuition generally means that it's something good and it's a right decision to make. But what we're talking about is something that is counter to your own good, which you're being kind of coerced into doing.
Right. It's way different from intuition. You know, you'll have an intuition that these things are bad. You know, the intuition is you shouldn't listen to them. That's coming from your spirit. That's coming from the positive forces. These things are after your thinking processes. You know, they're trying to take over how you think.
Yes, Chris, also, your other question was, do the voices talk to each other? We just covered that. I don't know whether you've just come in, but we did actually mention that they seem to talk to each other within one subject, but they don't cross over into other people's voices. That's right, yeah?
Yeah. And the worst is when there's some patients that have hundreds of them that all scream at them all at the same time. That is devastating.
I think that's probably people's perception of what this is about, because you kind of get that reflected in movies, you know, when they can portray people who are suffering from voices. It's usually loads of them screaming at them in an uncontrollable and indecipherable way.
Right.
You know,
and that's not real common. You know, but periodically you run into a patient who says, I have hundreds of them. You know, those are the worst.
How do they know there's hundreds of them? They've all got different accents, different personalities.
I guess, you know, I guess I'm not quite sure that they're able to differentiate them, and sometimes they give them names.
That's really interesting, because if they, you see, this is a very fine point here, because if the voices are you and they manifest as your own thoughts, how can they be differentiated against? They must have different personalities or different patterns.
Yeah, I think
that's kind of an interesting thing, isn't it?
They have different personalities of sorts. But you know, some patients have a hard time differentiating them, and some are very clear that they're, you know, who they are, what they do, which one is talking. And what they can expect from the different ones, and they have different strengths. You know, some of them are
Sherry's
weak.
just put in, hundreds of them sounds like a crowd of people yelling at you, which is what we were talking about. Yeah, it's kind of the way it's portrayed in films, isn't it? When people are going mad, it's like this cacophony of voices in their head, you know.
Yeah, or like you know, a angry crowd threatening you.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Hey, Sherry, jump in anytime.
Yeah, she's putting some good points in.
Yeah, jump in anytime. So I went on and asked this guy, I said, did they ever do anything similar where they showed you they had supernatural powers at other times? He said, oh yes, they always knew where the drugs were. He said, since age 12, they would tell me where I could find drugs. Once I was living in San Diego, so here's that story. He said, once when I was living in San Diego and was strung out on cocaine, they told me to take all my money about $250, find 2 burlap bags, fill my gas tank, and drive to Oregon. They told me they knew where there was several huge Sesame marijuana farms, and he trusted them, you know. So he said I followed their directions and found 4 large pot farms in 2 weeks. I followed their directions step by step all the way up to Oregon and until I found a dirt road. Then they told me to turn left on the dirt road, and I did. I went up the dirt road for over 20 miles until it dead ended and turned into a trail that went up into the mountains. When the road ended, I'd asked them, well, what now? They told me, well, take the burlap bags and head up the trail. He said he walked for about 4 hours. I said, you never got lost? He said, no, never. He said, I hiked for hours, and they told me step by step where to go. When I got up there, I cut the best part of the healthiest plants and filled the gunny sacks and hauled them down the mountain. And I said, were you never there before? He said, never. How far was the pot field from where you started off in Southern California? He said, 1,500 miles. So here these voices are directing him for 1,500 miles to this pot field in the mountains of Oregon. And I said, and you just took off without enough money to pay for gas to get back, and you trusted the voices enough to do that? He said, yes, I had just enough money at the time to buy gas to get up there. I asked him, well, what did you do after you cut the pot and filled the sacks? He said, I asked the voices, well, what do I do now? They told me where a park was that I could go sell the pot. And I asked, and there was a park where they told you there would be one, and people came to buy the stuff? He said, yeah. I said, what'd you do after you sold the marijuana? He said, well, we went fishing. When he says we, he means him and the voices. So I'm sitting here listening to this, and like, this guy's got to be shitting me.
Yeah, like demonic entities have all of a sudden
with my head
an
or
interest
what,
in angling. Yeah.
So I'm like trying to, you know, and this has happened to me a lot of times. It's like, what? But you look at him, and I'm like studying his face to see if there was a cracked smile or whether, you know, I could feel the deception. I felt none, you know. So he goes, well, we went fishing for 3 or 4 weeks. He said, I bought a bunch of prostitutes and all the cocaine I could handle. I said, we went fishing on the Columbia River. The voices were fishermen. They like to fish. And I'm sitting there going, what the frick is this? What? You know, and I'm going, you're shitting me. He goes, no, I'm telling you the truth. I mean, and he was straight faced. He said, there were a bunch of fishermen out there on the river, but nobody was catching anything except me. He said, the voices told me where to throw my lure, and when the hole was fished out. They told me when and where to move. I was the only one on the river catching any fish that day. And I said, they liked fishing? And he goes, oh yeah, they were fishermen. They loved it. I'm like, my head's going, yeah, they kept saying, oh, just one more cast. He said, throw your lure over there or over here, you know. And he said, we caught tons of fish. We had hit all the major rivers over the period of weeks. And I said, so it was just you and the guys, your fishing buddies? He said, yeah, we drank lots of beer. We ate well. We went to a bunch of shows, paid a lot for prostitutes, and bought a lot of cocaine. We had a great time. He loved it, you know. So what was happening? He was slowly being destroyed. You know, he was strung out on cocaine. You know, the voices told him that if he went up there again, they were onto him. They would kill him. You know, so that comes up later. He said, I asked, how come you didn't stay up there and keep living the high life? He said, the last time I ran out of money, I was going to go up to the mountain to cut more marijuana to sell. The voices stopped me and said, oh no, you can't go up there again. I said, why not? I said, because people whose fields we raided were up there waiting, and the police are looking for you down here at the park. You can't keep doing this stuff forever. You have to stop at some point. I asked him, and they actually would tell you to stop? He said, oh yeah, they would tell me when it was time to leave. They told me it was time to pack up and head back to San Diego. They said, you've had your fun, now let's get out of here. It's time to leave. I asked, did they ever do anything like that before? He said, oh yeah, they were great hunting buddies. They would tell me where to go to find deer, and the deer would come. So this kind of stuff isn't just from one guy. I mean, it's from scores of different schizophrenics.
Yes.
Like I said,
So
that
they
was
have
the
an
end of that.
overview which is much wider than people would realize. In other words, they, as we were just saying, are not dimensional. They are other dimensional. Therefore, time and space does not apply to them, which is a very
means nothing
important
to
point.
them. There is no cause and effect there. You know, it's all an energetic universe, and it plays by different rules.
Somebody's just put into chat, is the sixth sense, are they voices? Well, no, that's an intuitive response to a personal situation. That's a totally different thing, I think. What do you think about that?
Oh, intuition?
No, the sixth sense, the ability to be able to intuit a situation which may be negative or something that's going to happen. The sixth sense is when you get a gut feeling about something. I think that's totally different, personally. That's my view on that.
Yeah, I think so. You know, especially if it's something that you should stay away from, because these things they're going to want to direct you into something that's going to cause you problems. You know, their main purpose is to generate that negative emotional energy which they feed off. If they could care about you less, you know.
So anything that takes you into a good place is generally, I would say, nothing to do with them. Yeah.
So this guy ended up in prison eventually, you know, and locked up for a long time.
I don't know what Dave's put intuition, then Mark, exclamation mark, question. I don't know what that means, because we just said that we're talking about basically intuition is your ability internally to be able to differentiate whether something is a good or bad, or there is something going on. What is this situation about? That is your inner ability, which can be developed through awareness, because a lot of people don't have intuition. They don't know what it is. They just react to things. But a lot of this is about self-awareness. If you're self-aware, then these things can't get in. These things get in through the gaps in the awareness, from my understanding of it, which would be the direct introduction to the next question was, does drinking spirits open you up to them? Of course it does. Because one, it weakens you, it takes away your inhibition, but therefore also a big chunk of your awareness. So obviously they can get in, because what do people do when they get drunk? They make mistakes, they fall over, they get into arguments.
And their personality changes. Their personality completely changes. They're not the same person.
Yeah. And in some people, it's so radical. I mean, we've all got friends that are so allergic to drink that whenever they go out getting drunk, they get into trouble. They don't remember it. And this is basically opening yourself up to these negative influences. Yeah.
Yeah, I've talked to patients that got drunk on their butts and woke up in another city. They in a completely drunken state. They drove themselves.
Well, the blackouts is where they get in, isn't it? You know, once you start blacking out, then you don't remember what you've done. And that's exactly what we were talking about earlier on with the case that I was talking to you about over the years, and also your experiences. Yeah. They don't remember. People don't remember them.
Yeah, they don't remember anything. It's like, well, how did I get here? I talked to one guy who woke up with blood on his front bumper, and he didn't know whether he hit a person or an animal.
Yes.
You know,
Sherry's just put in, everyone has intuition. Few know what it is, and even fewer recognize it. That takes practice before you know the difference between intuition and thoughts. That's a very good point, and that sums up exactly what we were trying to say. Thanks, Sherry. Thank you.
Yeah, and you have to start trusting your intuition instead of just blowing it off. You know, when you get a feeling of, well, I shouldn't be doing this, or I shouldn't get on that plane, or I really shouldn't go to the movies or go shopping right now, trust it. You know, it takes some practice.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, an interesting aside is that when that King's Cross fire was on, I was in a pub and we were going to go somewhere just when because quite a few people were killed in the King's Cross fire. It was a long time ago, in the late 80s, I think. And we were just in the pub, and I said, "Nah, don't go yet. Don't go yet. Give it another half an hour." And then there's loads of things that have happened to me. You know, very serious car crash could have happened, and lots of other things. These things happen, but I think people may be not aware of them. But I think when you develop this extra awareness, you know, and I've always warned people, I said, that person is wrong. right? Don't get involved with them. And 6 months down the line, they go, yeah, you were right. You were right. And I've always been right about it. And that's not because that you got some special power. It's because you're just slightly tuning in more. You're just actually using what you've been given, basically.
Well, that was critical working in the prison too. You know, you had to be able to ferret out who was playing a game on your head and who wasn't. And I was pretty good at that. But then when I start hitting stuff like this, you know, and it's weird as hell, and my intuition is saying this guy's telling the truth. You know, it's like, what, you know, like I said, there were times where I felt I was going nuts because I couldn't talk to anybody about this until I met Sherry. You know, and that she was the first really sane person I could talk to about this. I couldn't even talk to my wife because she's going, you shouldn't be poking around in the heads of psychotics. You need to stop that stuff. And she goes, no, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. You know, and I couldn't talk to anybody on the psych staff because I'd get locked up or lose my job. So here I am sitting there going, am I going nuts with this stuff? You know, the only people I could talk to is like people like this.
Yes.
You know, where we're carrying on a conversation. They understood. I understood.
Yes.
But nobody else did.
Well, it's lonely at the top. Yeah. Sherry's just put in, Jerry, tell a story about the Indian arrowhead. Your intuition experiment.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So I had just gotten out of graduate school. Okay. So at that point, it was 4 years of undergraduate psychology, 2 years of master's in counseling and psychology. And I rode with a friend. We took our motorcycles and rode to Savannah, Georgia. And we're camping at a campground there, which was right in the swamp or near the swamp. So Savannah has thousands of acres of swampland there. So here I am thinking about what I'd just been through with the 4 years of psychology, and I found that I was being lied to there in several places, you know, and you know, I'm sitting down. Rick wanted to go to some sports store, and I'm sitting there thinking about, well, listen, all they taught me was, you know, what was it? Left brain stuff. You know, it was like reasonable stuff, reflect back feelings, this kind of stuff. These different forms of counseling, which I was finding out didn't work very well. So I'm thinking, I'm going like. You know, they didn't address feelings at all. They you know, the only thing they did with feelings is like, oh, well, you just reflect the feeling. You know, if the guy says you're feeling sad, you say, oh, yeah, you're feeling sad. You know, to get the guy to realize that you're listening to him. But there wasn't anything about feeling as an energy or feeling driving thought or anything like that. It was as spiritually devoid as the Sahara Desert is dry. I had to read other spiritual books just to get through the program because I wasn't getting any feeding from the program. So one morning, Rick was decided to go take his motorcycle and go into town. And I'm going, well, I wonder what would happen if I just followed my feelings and intuition for the rest of the day and see what happened. So I decided to do that after he left. And inside about 5 minutes, I was on private property. I'd already crawled over a barbed wire fence where it said no trespassing. And I was heading off into the swamp on private property. And then I hear this quad, you know, ATV coming, and I'm going, here's this voice in my head going, you know, there's a still here somewhere. These guys are in the swamp. They have stills and they make illegal liquor, and they'll shoot anybody who comes anywhere near them. You better get out of here. And I'm like, shut up, get out of here. I don't want to hear from you. You leave. So I hid in some bushes until that guy passed over, and then I continued into the swamp. And I'm just walking wherever I felt like walking. I'm going deeper and deeper into the swamp, and it's like 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And I'm going, what am I doing? You know, and I'm like, shut up, shut up. And then I keep going further, and here's this marsh, you know, kind of water and muck and stuff on one side, and I'm walking along the edge of it in this forest. And then in front of me, this big black snake jumps out. And I jump back, And here's this voice going, you better get out of here. You're going to get bit by a water moccasin. Nobody's ever going to find you. You're going to be dead out here for weeks. You know, nobody knows where you are. Nobody knows what you're doing. You know, what are you doing? You're losing your mind? Go back. Get out of here. And I'm like, shut up. Get out of here. So I threw it out again. I just kept walking into the swamp where I felt like going. And I'm thinking to myself, like, am I losing my mind? What is going on here? You don't even know where you're at, you know, and in another hour or so, the sun's going to start going down and you're in the middle of a freaking swamp. What are you doing? And I'm like, shut up. Just shut up. So I keep walking further and further in the swamp. And then at some point I see this little island out to my left, and it's pure white sand. And I stood there and I'm staring at it like, what is that doing here? There wasn't any white sand anywhere around. That was the only area where there was pure white sand. And it was about 10, 15 feet out into the swamp, further into the water. You know, there's no way I could get out there by walking. And I'm sitting there staring at it, and you know, this intuition goes, you need to go out there. It wasn't in words, it was just this tug, you know. So I went, you got to be kidding. Are you nuts? I can't get out there. What are you doing? And I said, that's enough. This is insanity. You know, this is just rip-roaring insanity. You're losing your mind. So I turned around to walk back, and that feeling just got a lot stronger. So I turn around and I go back, and I'm staring at this island, you know, 15 feet out, and I go, okay, all right, I got to get out there. So I start getting logs and sticks and whatever I could find, and I built this rough bridge to get out there. And once I jumped on the, I'm going, why am I doing this? I can see everything on that island from here. I mean, there's nothing there. And, you know, it's only 10 feet away. So I finally got out there, and I'm standing there, and I look down, and here's all these little black sand crabs that I've run into them a bunch of times. And when you run into them, they just scatter all over the place. They just go in all directions. But what these guys were doing, they were all walking in a straight line. I mean, they weren't all together in a straight line, but they were all walking in the straight line in the same direction, which was very unusual for them. Usually they scatter all over the place. You know? And I'm sitting there staring at that going, that's very odd. And my attention gets focused on one of them, and I'm watching that one, and he walks over a pebble. And as soon as he does that, my attention is dropped off of the little crab, and it's stuck on the pebble. So I'm staring at the pebble, and I look around the island, and I don't see any other pebbles anywhere. There's no rocks, there's no pebbles, it's just sand. So I'm going, that's odd. So I reach down to try to pick this thing up, and it won't come out. And I'm like, what kind of pebble won't come out? So I stick my fingers under it, and I start pulling on it, and almost like it was materializing out of thin air, this beautiful 6-inch spear point comes out of that island. You know, I have it hanging above my head here, but if I take the tape off of my camera and show it, I won't. I'll have to struggle with it to get it back focused again. Yeah, but it's about this long, and it looked like it was brand new. I mean, it looked like it was carved yesterday. And I'm like, that's validation. You know, that's what this was all about. It was a validation of intuition and feeling. You know, and this is your reward. Yeah. This beautiful spear point. So I started wearing that thing. First, I kept it next to my bed, and there was something special about it. And so I started wearing it around my neck into the psychiatric hospital, and technically it would have been considered a weapon. So I didn't want anybody to see it, because they would, you know, think, well, this guy's a nut. You know, what are you doing wearing a 6-inch spear point? You know, but if I put it under my undershirt, it would poke me in the belly. You know, when I bent over, it had a very sharp point, and it poked me in the belly. I went, well, that ain't working out so well. So I took it, and I remember it was December 23rd. It was in the 70s sometime. I started wearing it around my neck, but I had this dream that it had fallen off of my neck and fallen to a tile floor. It was like a linoleum tile floor, and it had broken in half. So I went, well, you know, based on how weird this whole situation is with this spear point, I better reinforce it. So I got the strongest string I could find, which was a big guitar string, wrapped it around there very tight, pulled it as tight as I could with pliers, and then got super glue and super glued it onto the end of that spear point. Then I melted the wire to the string together, tested it out, and I went, well, that ought to hold. So I started wearing it again. And I had this dream that spear point had fallen off of my neck onto a tile floor and broke in half. So that's why I reinforced the thing. 2 weeks later, I'm walking down one of the halls in the psychiatric unit I was working in, and the string broke. And that thing fell onto a tile floor that was exactly looked like the one in the dream. And the tip shattered. And I was in shock. I went into, it's like do. It's like Outer Limits. And I stepped, I'm stooping down in the middle of the floor, in the middle of this hallway in the psych unit with all these, nurses and everybody passing by. And I'm staring at this thing in shock. It's like something hit me in the head with a frying pan. I was just shocked. How could this be? And all of a sudden I hear somebody say, "Are you okay?" I look up and here's this nurse. And I grabbed the spear point and I stuck it in my pocket real fast. She didn't see it. So here it comes again from another level. So that was my first wake-up call. Intuition is real. Follow.
Yeah, someone's just put in there, Hannah Fry lectures on ignoring intuition. I've just looked her up, Jerry, and she's a mathematician out the University College London, and basically wants to study patterns of human behavior and relationship and dating and how mathematics apply to them, which tells you how much she knows about intuition. I think that's conclusive proof that University College London can be kept out of the debate, because they are one of the main areas for the training of materialistic atheist propagandists. Right. So we've done her. Yeah. She's gone. Bye-bye.
Yeah. But I had one. There was Sherry and I both know this guy. It was a Dr. Ermark who he wrote an article stating that I think he says Sherry would know, she'd remember, something like stating that the voices were demons or something like that. Mm-hmm. And he published it, in one of the journals, and the medical community went nuts. He got attacked by psychiatrists. He got attacked by doctors. One lady was very vocal, and she was a philosopher in one of the big universities in England. I forgot which one it was, but she wrote, and she just really just mocked Dr. Ermark to death, just made fun of him and just ran him down.
That's the job of the academic, is to defend the materialistic, atheistic new system, basically.
Yeah, but she was a philosopher, which is kind of halfway in between anyway.
Yeah, that's right.
So when I saw that, I wrote her back and I said, "You don't know your ass from a hole in the ground. You wouldn't know a schizophrenic if you saw one. You have no idea what you're freaking talking about." Yeah. I never heard back from her, but I blasted her good. So yeah, they have no interest in this, because you can't measure a thought. You can't see a thought. You can't feel a thought. It's not amenable to the senses. You can't find somebody else's thought and put it on a petri dish and measure it. It belongs to a different universe. So they're trying to convince everybody we're spiritual beings. I mean, we're spiritual beings. We're amenable to spiritual illnesses, and schizophrenia is one of them.
Well, the true priest class on the planet have always known this stuff. They just keep it from the public. It's not in the public's interest for them to know about higher thinking. If you're trying to get now we're in the post-industrial era. So in the industrial era of schooling, they were making people who would be amenable just to manufacturing jobs. Now all that's gone. So there's a different thing going on. They've got a different system that they're implementing. But these people don't realize that they're just implementing a program. So they will always fall back on these default arguments which don't work. But they can shut down debates. And we've seen that happen time and time again. We have this idiot in the UK called Professor Brian Cox, who's basically just a waffler who they bring on to to basically shut down anything from climate change to psychic phenomena. He knows nothing about anything. But someone's just put in sleep paralysis, and they mentioned that now. Sleep paralysis is something that I've talked about in the past, and it's something that I wouldn't say suffered from, but it's something you can induce, and that's a different thing altogether. But often people get this fear because they can't move, and that's what they call the night terrors. It's a thing that is a bit misunderstood, I think. But I used to get into that situation purposefully after I trained myself to get into out-of-body experiences, because then you can induce these vibrations to leave the body. Now, that's a whole different subject, but we did cover it on one called OBEs and psychic phenomena, which is linked to our article Demons Are Real on Windows on the World. I think it's in the latest shows section, where I've put about 6 interviews I've done with Jerry. It's all in there. But I think we have covered a lot of stuff tonight. We've been going for over 2 hours.
Wow.
And maybe, yeah, I mean, time flies when you're doing this, but maybe we should wrap it up with some concluding remarks for this particular show. We'll definitely come back and do some more soon.
Why don't you take them a level deeper? Because you have some poems from a psychotic killer.
Yes. I think we should do that in a different show, Jerry.
Oh, because you think so?
Yeah, because we're 2 hours in now, and the average sort of that people look at YouTube videos is only about 10 to 15 minutes. I mean, the people who listen to our show, I think they do listen to everything, and they download all our podcasts and everything. But I think that
that's pushing the limits.
Yeah, we are pushing the limits now, and I don't want to overburden people too much, because this stuff with the poems, I think, would be better as a separate show now, because we've been going for quite a long time.
Yeah, and that's pretty heavy too. So, you just had a glimpse into the psychotic mind. It's not what you would think. It's far from what they teach you. Coming out of graduate school, I felt like, oh, these are hallucinations and it's word salad. It's just incomprehensible garbage that these people are hearing. That's the impression I was left with until I started poking around in their heads and found out there's a well-defined pattern to all this, that they're denying and won't even let you investigate. So, you can see for yourself, those of you who work with schizophrenics or have schizophrenics in the family, this is what's going on in their minds. This is a snapshot. It's a very, very short snapshot, but it's not what the establishment wants you to think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think we've covered much in that one, and it's taken things into another direction, which I'm very pleased about. I've been very interested in the comments that have been put into the chat, so I've been monitoring that and looking through it. And Kevin's a friend of mine, so I'll just read this out. Do you think some kind of exorcism might ever be useful as an instrument for dealing with psychopathic rulers?
Not for long.
No, because exorcism only works for a short period of time,
right.
And would take, it doesn't mean that the door is closed for the entities to get back in, and the people who are up there allegedly ruling on behalf of the people who are really ruling are merely acting as though they are possessed.
No, you got to throw them out.
Yeah,
they've got to be thrown out.
That
forcefully
was the title of one of
if
our
necessary.
Shows. Yeah, demonic entities, cast them out. Yes. So that's great, Jerry. I think maybe we should wrap it there.
Okay.
And we can come back anytime that you're free. And I keep our YouTube channel merely for advertising our shows. Usually all of our stuff gets put onto Odyssey now. So this will end up on Odyssey if it's not there already. Some of the live streams don't get there after you upload them. But we have had community strikes on YouTube, so we don't put much up here. And please join us every Sunday, 9:30 p.m. You can go to windowsontheworld.net homepage and find all the links to everything we've ever done. It's all on there.
Okay.
So
Sherry and I have put a lot more information on our website at jerrymarzinsky.com. There's a lot more information there to help you guys out who are struggling with this stuff.
Yes, so maybe you could just talk briefly about the book before we wrap up.
Well, Sherry and I took us 2 years to write the thing. And it's one of the first things that any therapist or any person who hears voices needs to understand what these voices are and how they operate. And the book tells people how we came about discovering that these things were not hallucinations, how they operate, what they do, and some of what you can do about that. It's all there. It'll open your eyes. It's a real eye opener.
So give us the title, Jerry, for anyone who doesn't know it.
It's called An Amazing Journey Through the Psychotic Mind by Jerry Marzinsky and Sherry Sweeney. So Sherry's been there. She's actually experienced these things. So we got two different perspectives coming in. Mine is a clinician working with hundreds of schizophrenics, and Sherry's personal experience. So she comes up with stuff like she just did. Oh, they sound like a crowd. They sound like a screaming crowd. So we would trade information back and forth. And what you get is a pretty complete picture of what the voices are, how they operate, what they do, and that they are parasites. And that is the cause of paranoid schizophrenia, one of the top 10 health problems in the world right now, that big pharma don't want a cure for, because they're making billions of dollars selling toxic drugs to drug the whole universe down. They'll drug the entire population. They're now drugging down kids, babies, with these hardcore nerve destroying psychotropic drugs. I mean, they should be sued. They should be locked up.
Yes. Sarah's just put, let me just get back to this comment. Yeah, it's a privilege to hear the workings of such minds. Thanks, Sarah. Thank you to both of you and to those who shared their stories and allowed them to be mainstream. Well, that's what we're trying to do, get this information out there. And so thank you for your comments. And Suspicious Minds put, whoosh, those 2 hours went fast. I'm very glad to hear that. Glad to hear it was engaging. And thanks to all our listeners, to everyone who's listened tonight. And spread the word, spread the video around. I'm sure there's people who appreciate it.
Get it out there, because it's not going to come out through the universities. It's not going to come out through psychology or psychiatry. It's going to come out through you guys.
Exactly.
They're not going to touch this with a 10-foot pole. They're making too much money.
Yes, and the bulk of the so-called alternative media doesn't touch it either.
No.
Because they seem to be trapped in their own kind of little web of intrigue. So, yeah, great. Greg Silverado just caught the tail end, Mark. Well, Greg, you can watch it from the very beginning, because it will be there until it's taken down, and we don't intend to take it down. I don't think YouTube have got any grounds to take this one down. So enjoy, and hope it's useful. So thanks, Jerry, and we'll catch up really soon.
Okay, till next time.
Yeah.